Hello everyone, it's Dark here, and I'm back with another video, and in this one we're going to discuss Paladins in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers versus Paladins in World of Warcraft Shadowlands. And I've been waiting to get max level on my Paladin in Final Fantasy XIV so I can do something like this. I'm pretty excited about it, and I think you guys will like this one. Before I start, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I don't know what you're doing with your life. So one more final thought before we actually begin the video. The video is basically two sections. One where the first part is where we go into details of how Paladin works in World of Warcraft, and we note some differences there, and then we move on to Final Fantasy XIV and showcase the Paladin class over there. I will put timestamps in the description, so if you want to skip to those sections, feel free to do so, as I know the audience of these videos are usually Final Fantasy players and also WoW players, so I just wanted you guys to know that. So World of Warcraft, the first thing I do want to point out is that as a Paladin, you can actually play as three specializations. You can play Protection, Holy, and Retribution. So one of them is a DPS spec, one of them is a tank spec, and one of them is a healing spec. So as a Paladin you can do all three, whereas in Final Fantasy Paladin is only a tank. And so for the sake of comparison in this video, I'm only going to stick to Protection Paladins, but I do want to point out that difference. Okay, with that being said, let's get into the Paladin story in World of Warcraft. Paladins are basically warriors of light, and all of their abilities are associated with holy spells. So if you look at a lot of their rotation, it's mostly consisting of holy spells that they're using. So it's cool in that sense. Even though you're like a melee you're a melee tank, but a lot of your abilities can be used at range, and they're all holy spells. The important thing with Paladins, one of the differences you'll notice in Paladins with World of Warcraft, is that there are talents in World of Warcraft where you can actually change your talents, and it'll change the way you play the game in minor ways and sometimes in major ways. And it's one of the cool things where you kind of customize your playstyle or change your talents based on the fight that you're doing. And I associated with how much mastery someone has over playing their class. So the better you are, the better you know when to change your talents to change your playstyle. And for example, if you look at this first row, when you have Blessed Hammer, you can see that this ability here, it replaces one of your abilities with Blessed Hammer, and it even has different animations. And for example, it does AoE, and it reduces the damage that the enemies do to you. Whereas, for example, if I go with Holy Shield, I won't have that ability anymore, and I will have Hammer of the Righteous, which is a different ability altogether. And that's why I'm saying it affects your playstyle. So you can have two different Paladins, Protection Paladins with different talents, and they would be playing differently. So that's a very important distinction between Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft. And you will often see, especially at higher levels, where for every fight, for example, in a raid, people will change around their talents to accommodate the different fights. So with that being said, let's look at some of the abilities that Paladins have in World of Warcraft. You have your rotation consists of mostly these 7 icons that you see here, 1 to 7. So you have abilities like Judgment, where you can cast from farther out, or Shield, Avenger's Shield, or you have Hammer of Wrath, which you can throw at enemies when they're below 20% HP. And you have an ability such as Concentration Aura, and one of the cool things about this one is if you're standing inside of your concentration aura, you take reduced damage, so your position matters as a Paladin in World of Warcraft, so you never want to not stand inside of your consecration. One other mitigation tool that you have is your Shield of Righteous, and the way it works is that some of your abilities, it's like some of your abilities, like your Judgment or your Blessed Hammer, generate holy power, which you see at the top here. And every 3 holy power, you can spend it on Shield of Righteous, which kind of does a shield bash. But what it also does, it increases your armor, which means it reduces the physical damage that you take. So once you have 3 holy power by using your abilities, like I'm showing here, you have the option to use it on Shield of the Righteous, which increases your armor, which means you take reduced damage. One other ability that you have is Word of Glory, which heals for 4,460, as you see there. But if you cast it on yourself, it does a significant amount more healing. So this one also costs 3 holy power. So when you're playing prop paladin, you're always kind of looking at, do you want the increased armor, or do you want to use the heal? So for example, if you're reversing a caster, the increased armor doesn't make much sense, so you're using the Word of Glory for the most part. Or when one of your party members are low, you can immediately, and it's an instant cast, so it immediately heals, and you don't have to cast anything. You do also have a Flash of Light, another heal, which is a heal that you cast, but this one doesn't really do that much healing, and it's usually never worth it. One other ability that you have, which is worth mentioning, is your Lay of Hands. As a paladin, it's a 10-minute cooldown, and it heals for your maximum health. So for example, mine is 36,000. If I press it, it heals for 36k, and it's a pretty huge heal. You can save yourself or a party member like immediately, instantly, once every 10 minutes. So it's a pretty powerful cooldown. You have one major offensive ability, and that one's called Avenger's Wrath. As you can see here, most people call it Wings. It increases your damage, healing, and critical chance by 20%. So it can also be considered as a defensive cooldown as well, because of the increased healing. And people do also use it like that, like when you're low and you press Avenging Wrath and you start healing, you do a lot of healing. And the animations for it is pretty cool as well. Grow a bunch of wings, and you do a lot more damage, and you also do a lot more healing. You also have Bubble for defensive cooldowns, and this one basically makes you immune to all damage for 8 seconds. This is a pretty iconic spell for Paladins in World of Warcraft. You have three other major defensive cooldowns. You have Ardent Defender, which reduces the damage you take by 20%. And then you have the Guardian of the Ancient Kings, which is a 5-minute cooldown, but it reduces all damage you take by 50%, which is pretty significant. And the animation for it is pretty cool too. You have Blessing of Protection, which is also another great cooldown, a utility cooldown that Paladins have. And basically it makes either yourself or a party member immune to physical damage for 10 seconds. So it's a great way, for example, to save your healer, or save someone who screwed up a mechanic and they're about to die from physical damage. You immediately cast this on them, and it's an instant cast, and it's great. It's a great way to save someone, and you can even, in a lot of raids, you can use this mechanic to help people, to break them out of CC crowd control as well. You also have Blessing of Freedom, which if someone is slowed, any kind of movement impairing, like if they're rooted, if they're slowed or something, you can use your Blessing of Freedom on them, and it'll remove all of those effects. So they have a lot of utility in World of Warcraft. And you also have a stun called Hammer of Justice, which you can use every 1 minute. There is a talent to make it shorter. And for movement abilities, you have your Divine Steed. And like if you want some movement, you press your Divine Steed, and it kind of gets on a mount for a short duration, and it jumps down, and you can use this in combat. So that's the only movement ability that Paladins have. So that's what you can see here, and I have 2 stacks of it because I have talented into it. And the last piece I want to show with Paladins in World of Warcraft is that you have 4 different auras that you can change in between. Like for example, Crusader aura gives you extra movement speed, and Devotion aura gives you extra reduces the amount of damage that the raid takes and you take by 3%. And there are 2 others, and that pretty much sums up a lot of what Paladins can do. They can also res out of combat, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And again, the rotation rotates around these 7 different spells that I'm showing here, and we occasionally use our cooldowns as well. So now let's jump into Final Fantasy XIV and see what Paladins can do over there. So I was finally able to hit max level on my Paladin in Final Fantasy XIV. I've been able to run a few raids and dungeons and get a good feel of how it is to play it. And I'm excited to share it with you guys, the differences that I noticed. So the first thing is that with Paladins in Final Fantasy XIV, it's a bit interesting. It's a mix of a warrior with holy powers and just a warrior like with physical damage. So they have a good amount of physical damage, and they also have some holy spells, and interestingly enough, they also have some bleeds in their kit. So if I really wanted to translate it into World of Warcraft, if I was forced to, it's kind of like a mix of warriors and paladins. And it'll be a bit more clear when we actually go into it. So obviously there's no talents in that sense in Final Fantasy XIV. And as a paladin, you're always a tank. So there's no such thing as specs either. And as I said, there's a mix of holy spells, which are castable. So for example, if I show you Holy Circle, it's a spell that you cast and does a certain amount of AoE damage. You also have some physical abilities like Fast Blade, which you can combo with your other abilities like Riot Blade, and you have abilities like Goring Blade, which puts a bleed on the target. Okay. There's also there's also the concept of combinations, where certain abilities will do more damage only if you do them in a certain combo. So, for example, your Goring Blade will only do maximum damage if you do it after Riot Blade, and that's the only way it will actually put a bleed on the target. So it's important to do the abilities in sequence. So one thing I noticed with Paladins in Final Fantasy XIV, you do have a lot more buttons to press. I can tell you that. So for your rotation, you have a lot more buttons to press. So if I were just to show you, where in World of Warcraft it was mainly those 7 buttons that I was showing you in the main rotation, in Final Fantasy XIV there's much more with a bit shorter cooldowns. So for example, you have the combination of Fast Blade, Riot Blade, and Goring Blade, which puts the bleed on the target. You have Spirits Within, which is an ability that's not on GCD, which you can use as well. So that's 4 buttons. You can do another combo with again Fast Blade, Riot Blade, and Royal Authority. So you use that, and then when you use that, another ability becomes available for use. You have 3 stacks, so now you can use your Atonement 3 times. So again, these are all part of, for example, if you're doing a single target, you are going to be using all of these buttons. And then you have Circle of Scorn, which also puts a bleed on the target. So that's another ability that you also use. Now on top of that, you have your mitigation cooldown, which is Sheltron, and you can see this bar over here. So where in Paladins and World of Warcraft had Holy Power, in Final Fantasy XIV you have Oath. So now you can use your Sheltron and it costs 50 Oath, and it blocks incoming attacks. Okay, so this one is really similar to what warriors have in World of Warcraft, and even so the animation is a bit more involved, obviously, and for a few seconds it gives you a block. So so you use that. You also have you have certain abilities as a paladin in Final Fantasy which have cast time, and it's not only heals, like they're also do damage. So for example, Holy Spirit does single target damage and it's castable, but obviously as a tank you don't want to be sitting there and casting, so you have this cooldown. I don't know how you actually pronounce it, Requiscat, or however way it's said. So when you actually use this, it increases your attack magic and healing potency, but it does damage, and what it also does is for 12 seconds all your castable spells become instant cast. So now whenever that's off cooldown you can use it, and now you can use all your castable damage abilities, and so that's also part of your rotation. And then you have this one where it consumes it and it does a huge amount of damage. So you're using this ability, Holy Spirit, you're using Confiteor. Oh, I hope that's the way you say it. And apart from that, you also have your cooldowns, which are pretty shorter than the ones in World of Warcraft. So for example, Fight or Flight is only a 1 minute cooldown and increases your damage by 25%, and it's 25 seconds. So you're using this as well quite often. You have Reprisal, which is like demoralizing shout for warriors, and it reduces damage of nearby enemies by 10%. You have your Interrupt, and then you have defensive cooldowns such as Rampart and Sentinel, which is similar to World of Warcraft because we have two different major mitigation cooldowns. You also have Bubble as a paladin in Final Fantasy XIV. It's called Hallowed Ground, and as you can see, it renders you impervious to most attacks, and it's a 420-second cooldown as well. So in that aspect, they are similar. You also have a heal. Again, this is a castable heal, but when you use it with your Requiscat cooldown, it will have it won't have a cast time, and you can use it to heal yourself or heal your party members. So that's another similar aspect between Paladins in World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. The other thing is that for movement, the Paladins, I would say, in Final Fantasy XIV are more mobile because you have a charge. So you have a charge like a warrior where you can just charge in and close the gap, and you have 2 stacks of it. I know that was a lot. Oh, you also have a stun as well. You have 2 stuns. You have a shield bash, which doesn't have a cooldown, but it shares GCD with all your other abilities. And then you have another stun, which is low blow. This doesn't share GCD with your other abilities, but it has a 25-second cooldown. You have so you don't have a bop in Final Fantasy XIV, but you do have cover, which basically makes you take all the damage instead of the party member that you target. There is a really cool ability in Final Fantasy XIV, which I think it would be cool to add for Paladins in World of Warcraft, and it's this one here, Passage of Arms. And what it does is it increases block rate to 100% and creates a designated area in a cone behind you, which everyone can go and take cover, and they will only suffer 85% of damage. So, and it looks pretty cool as well. I'll show you guys. So when you hit it, it kind of creates this, as you can see, it creates like you're pretty much covering everyone and they all get behind you, and it's a pretty sick mechanic to use in raids. One more cooldown I want to cover is the There's intervention as well. Again, it reduces target party damage by 10%. If you're using a cooldown, if you're using one of your defensive cooldowns, it reduces the damage even more. And then you have your Divine Veil ability, and basically the next time you get healed, it'll create a barrier on all the party members. And it's a pretty interesting spell. If you know some mechanic is going to happen, you can actually use it and put shields on most of the party members, and it'll reduce some amount of damage. So as you can see, there's a lot of abilities for Paladins in Final Fantasy XIV, and you're almost using most of them actually. I've noticed in raids I'm actually using almost all of these abilities. Even though the combat is the GCD is pretty long, so if you can see when I use one of my abilities how long I have to wait before I can use the next one. But since you have so many abilities that are off GCD, you can have some actually fast-paced combat. It's just that it's going to be in 30-second intervals because of the cooldowns of your off GCD abilities. But I can say the combat is pretty engaging, just because you have so many buttons that you can press. It makes for some interesting gameplay, especially in raids and dungeons. Yeah, with that being said, I think that pretty much sums up the Paladins in Final Fantasy XIV and the differences they have with World of Warcraft. I hope it kind of showed you Final Fantasy XIV players what World of Warcraft has to offer for Paladins, and I hope it showed the World of Warcraft players what Paladins have to offer in Final Fantasy XIV. And to me personally, it was really interesting to see the differences and how the two different games have approached it, the similarities, and the way they have branched out into the different abilities. Alright, so thank you guys for watching. I hope it was helpful, entertaining, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.